I worked at my best friend's parents' restaurant. I delivered food for them and sometimes helped clean tables or do other jobs. The work itself was okay, but it felt weird having my friends' parents as my bosses. I thought it would get easier, but it didn't. They got upset every time something didn't go perfectly. Also, they scheduled my friend and me to work on different days, so we didn't get to work together, which was the reason I took the job. This happened in my third and last month working there. It started as a normal night, and I was doing a few quick deliveries, but things slowed down a lot as the night went on. My friend's dad didn't like it when things were slow, because I'd have to stand around waiting for orders, and he'd always be in a bad mood about it, even though it wasn't my fault. Around 8:30 p.m. an hour after my last delivery, and just 30 minutes before my shift ended, he got a phone call. I overheard him saying that we had a delivery to make. He then made the food and gave me the bag, but when I looked up the address, it was 40 minutes away. I complained because my shift ended in 15 minutes, and this delivery would take almost 90 minutes. He didn't care. I could tell he was just mad because I had been standing around, even though it wasn't my fault. After a short argument, I decided to do what he asked. 40 minutes was a long drive for our small town, so I had no idea where the address was. By the time I was just 2 minutes away, it was almost 10 p.m. There were no houses around for most of the drive, but at the last minute, the GPS had me turn onto a small street that led to a row of about 6 houses. They all looked old and run down, and they were the only houses I had seen in the last 5 minutes of driving. I drove slowly past each house, looking at their numbers until I found the right one. Then, I parked on the street next to the driveway. I'm not going to lie, the place gave me some creepy vibes. It was so far from everything, and the houses were just old and spooky. I got out of the car and walked up to the doorstep with the bag, then rang the doorbell. Nobody came, so I knocked. It was getting late, and I just wanted to finish, so I started getting impatient. While I waited, I looked around. The street was empty with no cars or lights on in any of the houses. I went back to my car, called the customer's phone, but they didn't answer. I sat in my car, not sure what to do next. They hadn't paid yet, so I couldn't just leave the food on the doorstep. Then I saw a light moving inside the house. I got out of the car and watched the light move through the downstairs windows and over to the front door. Then it turned off. A second later, the door opened. A young man, probably in his early 20s, was standing there holding a big flashlight in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. I walked up and asked if he had ordered the food. He nodded and apologized for taking so long to answer the door. I said it was okay and tried to hand him the bag, but he raised both hands to show me they were full. Then he asked if I could please put the food on the kitchen table for him. At first, I thought he was joking because he could have easily set the flashlight or grocery bag down for a moment, but then I realized he was serious. I looked around him, and from the short entryway, I could tell something felt off about the place. The place was very dusty and seemed empty. When I saw that and thought about the flashlight being used instead of normal lights, I pretty much knew this house was empty. The man kept staring at me, waiting for me to say something. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry. If you can pay quickly, I'll leave the bag right here on your porch." He didn't like what I said, and it showed on his face. He put the grocery bag down and stepped out onto the porch. I moved back so I wouldn't get too close. The look in his eyes made me feel like he was about to do something, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what. I dropped the bag and ran to my car, driving away fast while he stared at me from the porch. I was shaking the whole way back, not sure what just happened. When I told my friend's dad about what happened, he only seemed worried that I didn't make the man pay. Because of that, I decided to quit right then and there. I knew my friend would be upset, but I was tired of his parents being rude to me when I hadn't done anything wrong. After that, things got tense, and I couldn't stop thinking about that instead of the man who had tricked me into going to an empty house and probably tried to rob me, or worse. I was so distracted that I didn't call the police, not until it was too late. Luckily, I wasn't stupid enough to go inside the house because if I had, I might not have come back from that delivery. I was working for Domino's Pizza, delivering orders. It was a slow night, so I spent a lot of time in the shop waiting for new deliveries. Around 10 p.m., a man walked in and went up to the counter. He looked like he was in his early 30s, but seemed tired and maybe even drunk. My coworker was helping him with his order, and I was in the back organizing the pizza boxes. After seeing how he looked, I started listening to their conversation. He seemed nervous about something and asked for a medium pizza, but then he said he wanted it delivered and gave my coworker a piece of paper. Once the order was placed, the man left. The paper just had an address written on it, which was strange because who forgot their address? Also, it's not normal for someone to come into the shop to order a delivery to their own home. 10 minutes later, I boxed up the pizza and started driving. It didn't take long for me to notice a strange car behind me. It was the only other car on the road, and it kept speeding up and slowing down like the driver couldn't keep a steady speed. When I saw the car swerving, I thought they were drunk, just like the man at the shop had seen. It seems silly now, but at the time I thought it was just a coincidence. When I got to the neighborhood, the car behind me pulled off to the side and parked. About 30 seconds later, I pulled into the driveway of a house that looked like any other. I walked up to the front porch, knocked, then knocked again. After waiting a couple of minutes, someone finally answered the door. It was a different man from the one who had ordered the pizza at the shop. "I have a Domino's delivery for Matthew," I said. The man stared at me with wide eyes, and I noticed he looked a lot like the other man, tired and drunk. It took him a few seconds to reply. Yeah, of course. "Thank you," he said quietly, reaching for the pizza. I handed it to him, and he looked at me like he was going to say something more, but then he just kept staring with a blank expression. I turned around and saw a guy in a hoodie jogging down the sidewalk, just 2 houses away, staring right at us. I quickly went back to my car, and the man at the door stepped out onto the porch like he was about to follow me. I got in and started backing out, but the guy in the hoodie stepped right behind my car to block me from leaving. The other man started running toward me, and at that moment, I just hit the gas to reverse. The guy behind the car barely jumped out of the way in time, and both of them started yelling and chasing my car onto the road. Under the streetlight, I could see that the man in the hoodie was the same one who had come into the pizza shop. With both of them still running in front of my car, I had to reverse fast down the street until I could safely turn around and drive away. I called the cops, and within an hour, both men were arrested for attempted robbery. Their plan was thought up while they were drunk. They probably thought that by ordering at the shop, we wouldn't recognize them because it was a delivery order, even though we had their name and address. It didn't make sense, but according to the records, they had already robbed people before, and one of those robberies ended with the victim getting beaten up in a parking lot for no reason. 2 drunk guys running at me with bad intentions could have turned into something really dangerous, but I'm glad I got away without getting hurt. Thankfully, they won't be able to do this to anyone else. I joined DoorDash to check if it was as good as people said. At first, though, it took me a whole month to try my first delivery. But once I did, I started doing a few deliveries each day, and I was really happy with how it went. A few months later, I left my grocery store job and started doing DoorDash every day after school and most weekends. That night, I worked late since it was a holiday weekend. I was driving from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m., mostly just picking up orders from the 24-hour McDonald's. A little after 2, I grabbed another McDonald's order and headed to the customer. The delivery was going to a warehouse, and the notes said to enter through the side doors and leave it at the front desk. When I arrived, I drove into a big, mostly empty parking lot with just a few semi-trucks around. The building looked like an old warehouse, a big rectangle with a few windows and one front door. I double-checked to make sure I needed to go to the side door for delivery, then drove to the side and parked there. The side door was one of those heavy metal doors with a small glass window. I peeked through the tiny window, but couldn't see much, just a small, dark entry room. The reflection from my car's headlights made it hard to see inside clearly. I opened the door, and it was just as dark as it looked. There was only a little dim safety light in the corner. There was no front desk, so I walked around the corner and found myself at the start of a long, dark hallway. I knew that places with night shift workers usually keep lights low, but this was extreme. I couldn't even see the end of the hallway. It was pitch black. If I walked down it, I'd be going into total darkness. I took out my phone to double-check for a third time, just to make sure I was at the right spot and using the correct door. Everything seemed correct, but I wasn't about to walk down that hallway. The longer I stood there, the more I noticed how silent the whole building was. No machines, no voices, just total silence. I decided to call the customer. I tapped their name and dialed, and then I heard a phone ringing from the other end of the hallway. A few seconds later, it rang again, but this time it was louder and closer. I looked down the empty corridor and could just barely see a faint glow coming from someone's phone in the darkness. "Hey, I've got your DoorDash order." "I'm going to leave it right here," I said, placing the bag down in front of me. Then, a large figure, a man, started coming toward me from the dark hallway. He didn't say anything, which felt strange. As he got closer, he kept walking quickly and silently, which made me feel uneasy. I started feeling like someone else might be behind me, or that something was off, and it all just felt a bit creepy. I quickly turned around and walked straight back to my car. Just as I was pulling away, I noticed some movement behind the small glass window on the door. The whole experience gave me chills, so I decided to call it a night and head home. In the end, I figured it was just a strange situation. Nothing happened, so I just shrugged it off. A couple of days later, on Monday evening while I was driving, I got a strange call from the police department. Things got a bit more complicated than expected, but basically, they wanted to know why I was at that warehouse at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday. They said they had security footage of my car there. I explained I was just a DoorDash driver and showed them the delivery receipt to prove it. Then, they told me what was going on. The police told me that when the workers came back from their holiday weekend, the warehouse had been closed and they found a DoorDash delivery just sitting in the middle of the hallway. Someone had broken in and ordered with a fake account, and that's already creepy enough. But the weirdest part was that they didn't even take the food. It was clear they were looking for something else. I'm not sure what they wanted from me, but I can only guess that if I had stayed and waited for the man, something bad would have happened.